Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay, and I wanted to talk about one of my favorite all-time projects, which was the live-action God of War commercial for the Super Bowl. Now, this has definitely been a challenging project, and a majority of the Ash effects were all created by myself, and I had one other person on my team. And going through all the challenging aspects of creating the visual effects, bringing it all together in such a small amount of time, I wanted to showcase a lot of the behind-the-scenes on this. So let's check out a quick clip from it. Now, this talk I'm about to show is actually something that was filmed a little while ago. I forget which city it was in. It was either Helsinki or Paris. It's been a while now, but I wanted to showcase this because I've never publicly shown it before. And I think that this is really great as it gives a lot of insight into what was involved, how I went about creating all the visual effects, as well as just in general, a lot of the process and a lot of the blood, sweat, and tears that were involved in pulling this off. So let's check it out.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming along. Cool. All right, well, thank you. So my name is Allan McKay, and I'm a visual effects supervisor working in Los Angeles, California. I've worked all over the world, primarily LA, New York, around Europe, Sydney, Australia, a lot of other places. I've been in this industry for nearly 20 years now. I've worked for various studios like Industrial Light and Magic, Blur Studio, Pixelmondo, Activision, Ubisoft, Prime Focus, you name it, a lot of different places. I got awarded as an Autodesk Master, and I've received a lot of other awards or been tied to projects that have received a lot of awards. I work a lot in visual effects and also supervising on set and doing public speaking as I'm doing right now. So, yeah, it's really great to be here, and one of the first projects that I'm going to be talking about is God of War, which came out for the Super Bowl 2013, and I worked with Imaginary Forces on this. I was working with John Hassel, who was the producer, Karen Fong was the director, and Jeremy Cox was the VFX supervisor and art director for it. Also worked with Theo Daly, who was initially art directing the beginning, like pre-production or pre-conceptual stage of it. And this to me was a great project to be a part of. I initially got contacted very early on in the conceptual stage, just to kind of figure out how we're going to shoot it, how we're actually going to do it, since it was a pretty ambitious thing to do. And so I was in Baton Rouge for, at the, I forget the film studio down there, but I was down there for a movie at the time. I got a call from Imaginary Forces in New York to talk about this film, and even just looking at the initial storyboards, you could tell this was going to be something special. And for me, it was one of those projects that I'd kind of hit a bit of a plateau in terms of like creativity and drive, and like this was something that really kind of got me inspired again. Like it fueled me to kind of really care again. And I guess over 20 years you kind of go through those phases where for a while you care and then you don't, and for me, like, this kind of got me back on the horse. So it was a really great experience all in all, because I was willing to kind of suffer, and I did, and I'm really just kind of bleed for this project to make it everything it could be. So yeah, I did everything I could just to kind of make this as epic as it could be. I wanted this to really have emotion. I wanted to make people really feel and just kind of be like, wow. And the response was great. I had a lot of people calling me up during the Super Bowl, just being like, dude, like, I just saw that was amazing. And even afterwards, I had a lot of meetings with directors and clients who were just kind of like, yeah, I just watched that was amazing. And I'm like, how did you even know I was on it? It was just really cool all in all. It was just a great project I'm always going to look back at and be proud of being a part of and bringing that visual emotion to it. So it was initially all shot in Southern California. I believe it was Chatsworth Hills. It was a 2-day shoot. I was involved in the second day of shooting, which was more to do with the ash and the visual effects. But it was really cool just to kind of look at a lot of the offline shots of this and how it all came together. I really love the whole idea, the whole feel of it. It's very Ridley Scott, it's very Gladiator, even the grade of it and just the concept of it is really beautiful. And I love just seeing this little girl. You see her like jump out of her mom's arms and like running through this massive army, and you see her just kind of wondering who is she and what's she running to or what's she running from. And as things clear, you see her look up onto the mountain to see her dad, who's the general, Kratos. And I didn't know too much about God of War. I knew of God of War, and I loved like kind of bits and pieces of it, but I didn't really know the backstory. And I really love this whole idea that he's like embracing his daughter and like holding her in his arms. It's like the perfect heaven. And then suddenly you get this transition, this switch to his personal hell. And I can't believe anything more terrifying than the concept of like even just being shrouded in ash, like embracing his daughter and having her just collapse down into ash. It was just, I can't think of what kind of experience that would be like, but just the whole transition from this beautifully green, a warm color, saturated environment to suddenly this very desaturated personal hell, and just the kind of transition between the two. I love how it all came together, and even just like looking at the initial storyboards and everything for it, I really felt for Kratos, and I don't know, I got chills in my spine just like looking at this, just thinking about how there can be a great narrative without there really being too much of one. There's no words, there's no anything in here. It's just specifically to do with how you can relate to the visuals and everything else going on. And by the way, buy the product. But so, I don't know, I'll play it again real quick. And we'll just talk about a few of the shots as we go. And I'm going to go into them more in depth later on. But the second location we did was all on stage at a soundstage in North Hollywood. But out here, it was like, just a very typical Southern California. Apparently, it's a pretty windy day, actually, which kind of really helped the whole sequence, I think, because typically LA isn't really that windy. And, but I don't know, it is, the whole feel of it, it really came together quite well. There was a lot of set extensions that Imaginary Forces did, such as this shot here and those ones. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that they did, and initially there's a lot of actors and props and everything made for it. This is actually green screen, that shot that they comped together. And then this is all the soundstage, so it's all shot green screen. This was one of the first shots we did, and it's a bit of a nightmare to do. And same with the wide shot, just getting that sheer detail in there. Same with the branches. The helmet was probably the most difficult. It's like a 5-day sim in the end, just to do all the dynamics. And then the breastplate as well. Like, there's a lot of shots. Like, it was pretty tremendous to kind of get this together. I worked on set doing a lot of the kind of second unit stuff, like shooting all the ash and trying to get that all to work. So it was a lot of fun, but at the same time, it was pretty daunting. Typical shoot is like 18-hour day, but it all came together really well. The visual effects, like once we shot it all, because the shoot was pretty quick, but then kind of getting into it, it became a pretty tremendous production. Just trying to getting the tracking done. We used a company in New York, and it took a long time to get the tracking right, and in the end, like some of the shots weren't even on the final days like right, and we had to kind of render out separate elements without the tracking and separate as much as we could, so that way we could track it in 2D. So there's a bit of problems there, just trying to get this all to work. Now here's a couple of on-set photos we took, just reference photos of Kratos, just to make sure that we had, a lot to work from. And obviously with all this stuff, like, the more reference you have, the better. Just even to look at the paint and everything that we've done, so we can kind of match that as closely as possible, and just for modeling and everything else too. So that was really helpful, just to have all that detail, and just also so that way you can't really ever second guess yourself. You can also pull texture reference for a lot of bits and pieces. So that to me was priceless, having all that there. It was great. Now, at the same time, we also took a bunch of reference photos of the girl, and just trying to get her to kind of stand still and do a T pose. So you can use that for modeling reference. Just do a T pose, turn 360 degrees. Even that kind of seemed to be a bit difficult to do, but I don't know. It kind of made for some amusing reference photos. Like, I don't really know what she's doing half the time, but yeah, it was pretty amusing. But she was really great to work with. Like, everyone there seemed to be a really good combination. Now, I'll try and pick up the pace a little bit, but this is a bit of a breakdown of the branch shot, which we actually ended up doing entirely digitally. The main reason behind that was that we had a prop tree for it that was made on set, and it wasn't really good. And I don't know, just when I got there in the morning and I saw the tree, I was just like, you know what, like, we'll just do it in 3D, because either way, having a prop tree that we're meant to have decay and blow away, we'd need to regenerate the 3D model for it and do all the tracking. It just didn't really make sense, since like the background and everything would need to be shot separately anyway. And so we just said, like, look, we'll do that. One of the artists I had, like, it was pretty much a two-team for the most part, between myself. I was producing on my end, supervising it, as well as doing all the visual effects. But then I had one other artist, Desiree Lunsford, who handled lighting and shading a majority of the shots, as well as doing modeling. So she actually took over this shot of doing the branch and just modeled it from scratch and did a lot of the preliminary, like, bending and transformation for it. And then I did all the particle effects and everything else for it. It was kind of cool, because in the end we decided to kind of just throw away the background and everything else and just reinvent the shot a little bit. And it was kind of cool. We got the okay from Imaginary Forces to do that, just to find a new angle and everything else and kind of work from there. So we reanimated the shot and made it a bit more interesting, because having it as a locked shot initially, I don't know, it wasn't as interesting as it could have been. So this just made it a bit more fun to play with. Now, moving on to the face effects, or the close-ups of the girl. These shots were interesting. What was kind of difficult initially was just the fact that we didn't have a good 3D track. So I did a lot of initial R&D, and then whenever we'd apply it to the model and put the live action plate together, it's just like, this isn't tracking right. And it literally, the last day of production, we still hadn't gotten a good track, and it was just really killing us a lot. So we ended up having to, like, split the cheeks up into separate shots in a way, so that way we could track them separately. So these were just a few of, like, the rough tests and stuff that very early on. I pulled on an artist at the very end to help out, Daniel Scruggs. He was really great just because he's a spare set of hands to kind of help out with this. So he'd deal with, like, importing the Maya tracks in the Max and being like, nope, still not working, and going through that and putting together comps. So it just meant that with so much to do with so little resources and people on it, it kind of just gave me a chance to kind of catch up on what I need to do as an effects artist, instead of having to juggle being IT, producer, soup, and everything in between. So that was really helpful just to kind of deal with. And I used thinking particles for all these effects. It was a no-brainer. I definitely had to use that, to do this stuff, because I needed dynamic meshes and everything else going on. I used fumefx, Krakatoa, V-Ray to render it all out, and we comped it all in After Effects. That was just because Daniel and Desiree both were After Effects people, so I kind of let them do their thing. And I knew that Imaginary Forces was also comping in After Effects. It kind of made sense to be able to give them our files. Now, initially building, like, the decayed face and everything, at the time, it was a bit of a sensitive issue, because there had been that shooting that happened at the end of 2012. So I know that it became definitely a bit of an issue, just to make sure that this girl didn't look like she was in pain or she in any way was in danger. The whole thing about her turning to ash isn't meant to be like a horrific thing. It's meant to be this kind of very supernatural transition, where it's really about symbolizing a shift from, like, one world to another in a way. And although none of that's really spoken, it's kind of an unsaid thing. So this is meant to be her happy, and it's more like a dream in a way, and the whole transition. So it's not meant to be some, like, grotesque thing. It's just meant to be her changing, like the transitioning to her going away in a way to, you know, make way for this new hell that he's really in, like as if his dream is essentially changed to a nightmare. So doing all this stuff, it definitely needed to be more of a supernatural effect. It wasn't meant to be at all like she's in pain or a grotesque thing. Now, moving on to the wide shot of the girl, this was really fun, but it was also actually the last shot to come together. We literally pulled this shot together in the last week of production, which was pretty mind-blowing at the time, just because it definitely was one of the most important shots, and we just didn't get a track until the very end. And so I'd been doing a lot of R&D initially, trying to get a very papery, decaying feel. So I wanted everything to turn to ash and blow away, but also feel kind of so light. And as it transitions and breaks down more, it would definitely feel like it's losing energy. And each time it breaks, and this would break 5 or 6 times, it was pretty insane. It would just kind of, the shift of mass and everything else would change too. So eventually it would feel like it's being more carried by the air, and the wind. It would have a lot of wind resistance, and it would just kind of blow away. So I wanted to definitely get that feel. I didn't want it to feel as if it's rock or something like that. I wanted to definitely feel more as if like ash flakes or something. Initially be rock, but continue to break down until it's powder and ash. So it was definitely a difficult transition, and also just the sheer volume of it. I didn't want this to be a lot of cheap tricks or anything. I wanted the entire volume to break and continue to break, as if just a touch of the air is enough to break pieces of it off. So I did a lot of fume stuff, and this was more, I just did a few tests, and it wasn't really something I took too seriously, but surprisingly, everyone really liked the fume stuff, so it ended up being in there. But I don't know, me personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I kind of wanted it to be more on the dynamic side, to kind of stay in consistency with the rest of the shots, because none of them are very fume effects. They're, you know, fume is more of a support layer. It's not a hero layer. Whereas the entire thing breaking down, again, I didn't want it to feel like cheap tricks. I wanted it to feel like this is one gigantic character that just continues to break until she just doesn't exist. So it was pretty interesting. I used every trick I could think of to get this to work. But again, the shot came together in less than a week, which was pretty mind-blowing at the time to have come together. One thing about this production was I actually got diagnosed with 2 herniated discs in my spine. So not only was I juggling doing this 20 hours a day, and it's kind of the reason why my spine got that way, but yeah, I was going through my personal hell, which just kind of added to the layer of like just why this, I think, project stayed in my head for so long afterwards, is something I'm proud of, but also something I survived. And yeah, just I don't think I could sleep if I actually had time to anyway. So for me, I was just standing at my desk for 20-hour days or 24-hour days, just trying to get this stuff done. That includes over Christmas, New Year's Eve. Like I literally spent, at my desk. I think I slept on my office couch. So, you know, it's definitely one of those passion projects that you put a lot of love into and bleed a little bit for it too. But these are all different effects that were part of the whole process, and I just knocked out as much as I could. And these were a few tests where, you know, the green represented the plate. Again, it wanted to be one of those shots where it transitioned from the plate to the character, and we need to kind of find the happy medium of when that would actually happen, whether it would be that she's already ash or where it would be, because she's already decaying in the previous shot. And we wanted to feel like as if she kind of just collapses into his arms, but also blows away, because she's got to basically be out of the shot before the next frame. So we need to kind of have it blow away with a lot of strong wind and everything else too. So, you know, there's a lot of layers that went into this. I just did this for fun, but it was just like a layer to just kind of see all the detail and, you know, go through the final result and everything. So, you know, again, just these were very early tests. We want this to come together very quickly, but we ended up having a bunch of like UV errors, and this was actually after all the artists left, and it was the day before, literally the night actually before delivery, that I found out that the shaders were wrong, they weren't really working. So I ended up having to literally reconstruct the entire shot from scratch, unwrap it all, build my own shaders. So I actually built, again, it's pretty ghetto, but I built all this from scratch, shaded it, lit, and textured the entire thing, just pulling actually rock textures off the web and slapping it all together, and then going through and rebuilding all the dynamics and everything now with UVs like fixed for it, so that way we could get it out. So I ended up recreating the entire shot by myself on the final night of production, which was one of those, like, I had one chance to render it and pray that it worked, and you know, being sleep deprived and getting it out the door. But I'm kind of happy actually how it turned out. Like, it looked better in the end, I think. Just I put a lot of displacement, bump spec, everything I could throw at it just to kind of really get a nice transition for it. So this was the underlying shader for it, but it just felt a lot really more detailed and had a better feel to it than it had before. So I really liked that about this shot. Whereas, you know, it definitely was like one of those last minute things, but it's kind of fun for me to kind of get in there and get to do some of that myself. So rather than just doing the dynamics for it. So I kind of enjoyed that. And there was the final, like, I just did a few test renders of it just to see how it looked. And so these were just like iPhone snaps, just, you know, at the end of production. But that worked out pretty well. So now let's move on to some R&D. Initially when I got on this, I was still on Star Trek and a few other projects, so I didn't have too much time for the first few weeks ramping up. But I got into this and I wanted to build just some concepts. So this was before I had any models to work from or anything else. But I just wanted to have the feeling of the weight, the mass, everything about it, just having the volume decay and blow away and bit by bit break down. So these were kind of crude initially, but I just wanted to kind of get that feel. I really didn't want this to look like polygons. I didn't want this to look like a Voronoi fracture that you typically get. I wanted this to look very different to anything else that was out there. And so these were all tests. I wanted to test it interacting with geometry and everything else, and really just at that scale being able to break. And also with this, I wanted to test like one flake, what that would do, having that break and break and break and break until it's nothing, and then do it to all the flakes. So this is a 6-face polygon, a 6-face cube, and just having that drop and then break into that much detail, that's what I wanted to have. It's just like, if that's one flake, if that can break to that level, and then apply that to 1,000 flakes or 10,000 flakes. I also wanted this to have a very papery weight to it. So these sims represent kind of the more the floatiness of it, having it things break and then be able to lift off the ground. I wanted to be able to sit on the ground, but then have the wind kind of be the thing that drives it and lifts it back up. So to me, it was more how it interacted with the air and how it interacted with the ground that were the most important things. I didn't want this to feel like just a standard fracture that you typically see with effects. I wanted this to be a lot more papery. I wanted this to feel as if it's going to break. You know, it loses its energy, and it just, whatever is going on in that world will pull it around and really drive it. So here's a more of a papery test. This is where I wanted to flutter and feel very much like it's light as much as paper flakes. So I think that was successful in those tests. And then, you know, here's a couple more, just kind of having it flutter and eventually settle down on the ground. And I wanted this to kind of definitely be the driven force for it. And now onto the helmet. So the helmet shot was pretty cool. It was entirely CG. We had the plate, but we ended up, I think, replacing it. So it ended up being, or at least like 99% all CG. I created dynamic flakes for it. This model was created by Desiree Lunsford. We had the initial one, but then we rebuilt it. She textured it, and you know, it turned out great. These were some initial tests very, very early on, but this was, to my surprise, the most difficult shot in the show. So much so that doing a dynamic sim was 5 days to do. And that was a big thing for me because I didn't want this to take more than 3 days at a time to do. So I kind of had a situation where a few times I would be doing simulations, and then I would realize, okay, like, basically I wanted each piece to break 5 times. I wanted to continue to break down like those flakes that I showed early on. But, you know, I got the level of detail I wanted for, like, let's say a section of the helmet, but if I was to do it to the entire helmet, it was taking 6 or 7 days to do. And the final result was amazing. Like, none of it's shown here, but it with something like 30 gigs for just the dynamic geocache. It was actually, I think it was bigger. I think it was more like 100 something gigs. It was huge. And the thing is that it was working, but I just have a rule of thumb that I will not typically let a sim go usually more than like a day and a half, but in this case 3 days, because I don't want to get to the final week and have it all perfect and then the client asks for one more change, and it's like, well, the whole project is due in 3 days and this is a 5-day turnaround. And on top of that, what if the network goes down? What if Max crashes? What if this or what if that? You're really then surrendering yourself to be at the whim of your computer. And if anything goes wrong, like you're screwed. Even on this already, I was running sometimes 2 or 3 sims of the same thing just in case something happened. And I was definitely finding ways to optimize things. Even I found doing Xmesh seemed to be the quickest way to be able to cache everything out of anything. So I would typically Xmesh everything using ThinkBox Xmesh. And then from there, I would, it was a lot faster than even just doing a standard play blast. So, and then you get the cache for free. So that tended to be how I'd work. And I'd work initially on one flake and I'd build it up section by section. I had a pretty big process for it. And it was just so much work. And it was unexpected. I figured the helmet would be a lot of work, but I didn't think it would be as much work as maybe the wide shot of the girl or the chest plate. A few of those ones, which all in all, every single shot, there wasn't one that wasn't. There's my little pancake sim, but all of these, I wanted to definitely feel like as it hits, it sends this kind of ripple effect through. It doesn't like. A lot of people actually said this, like the people who actually had seen it. Some people said like it's not breaking right. It should smash more, here and bounce more. But that's the whole thing. Is I wanted this to feel as if it's ash. Like again, it doesn't have any life inside of it, and as it hits the ground, the rest of it more just kind of plows down over it as if it was kind of made of dust or something or sand. If you were to get like a glass or something, what happens is you drop it on an angle. The section of impact is going to shatter, and the rest of it is going to reverberate the impact through, which will cause it to break, but not as intense. But those pieces typically will bounce away, and that's not what we wanted to do here. I wanted this, as you can see here, to be more like the whole thing would crumble over itself, but it would just spill out like as if it was made of sand or powder, At the same time, like I really wanted this just to spill over itself and to have this effect where initially you would have just this whole transition of when it hits to kind of just blow away, and having the ash, because I ended up doing digital ash for this, and I think that was in a way its saving grace, because having it spill over a background where they really wanted to blow away, but if you looked at what the plates were doing, it wasn't really blowing much at all. So what I wanted was actually for this to spill underneath all the ash. And so I ended up doing these really complex sims where the helmet would spill, like it would crash and spill out and turn into this smaller, powdery substance of flakes and everything. But as it does, it actually spills out underneath because it's such a small layer of or level of scale that it spills out underneath the ash and kind of carries, like sweeps away all the ash underneath, like kind of like it floods underneath. And it's kind of hard to describe, but I really wanted to have that feel and that interaction. So to me, having a plate wasn't, like a footage of ash wasn't really going to cut it. So I wanted to go entirely digital. Again, Desiree Lunsford built the ash shader, and it looks really cool. I love how it turned out. It was pretty epic getting it in there and seeing like it looked exactly like how we had shot it. And that worked out really well, just being able to have like, once we were able to go entirely digital, just having free reign to do what we wanted with it just changed everything. So I'm just going to play this one last time as we go through, or at least bits of it, but as you can see, there's a lot of destruction porn, a lot of fracturing and everything. One thing I did on this, which is also why I have so many play blasts or previews of this, is I built a tool around this which would allow me to just do play blasts whenever I wanted, but it would actually store all that information. So every single play blast I had from the show, it actually kept. And there's a lot of reasons why this really was beneficial. First of all, it meant that I had record of everything I ever did, but it also meant that whenever I had clients asking for updates, typically I wouldn't need to take half a day off to put together a presentation. And that was a big thing, because if you don't have a producer or you don't have a few pairs of hands, it's kind of up to you to do that. And it means stopping what you're doing, and not only that, but then customly kind of finding stuff to put together. So being able to just like pull out like all your latest stuff and say, look, I know it's not rendered, but take a look at this. What do you think? Most of the time, they just want to kind of have that reassurance that, okay, everything's moving correctly. It's not going in the wrong direction. Like literally, like the project isn't. They just want reassurance and to be kept in the loop. So showing that you're moving along with it is definitely really powerful. But on top of that, like, obviously for presentations like this, I can do that. I can have stuff to show. But what I found to be really an unexpected thing, but it changed everything, was I could review what I was doing that day or that week. And I could just kind of look at the shots as a whole, and I could actually look at each shot and like look through all the takes. And I could see it's starting from the beginning to getting better and better and better. And then when I started looking at certain shots and realizing like, the past 5 play blasts I've done all look identical, I could kind of start to identify those moments where I've kind of peaked and I've hit a plateau where my progress isn't really moving as far ahead as I wanted. And that was a really interesting thing. And I've started kind of really adapting that process in my work, where I'll constantly review what I'm doing just so I can see, like, are things getting better? Are they getting worse? Are they staying the same? Because if you're not making these big leaps and bounds, then maybe you've got to like look at, okay, I'm just, everything's looking the same. It's not really making much progress. Let's like pick up the slack and keep moving forward, or let's reevaluate where we're at. So I think that became a pretty important thing, being able to look at where things are at and whether or not like you actually are making that progress that you need to be making. So I think that's kind of a pretty crucial thing. This has definitely become part of my process, and it's definitely changed how I work as an artist. And as you can see, this is a lot of R&D, but I went through a lot of phases, and the whole idea was that I wanted this to actually break down, as I mentioned before, like 5 times. I wanted to really break apart. And in the end, I actually disabled 2 levels of the fracturing just because I couldn't get it done in time. And, so that was kind of a bummer that I didn't get to really make the shot as epic as it could have been. So it's a bit of a shame, but I still love how this turned out. We can see the final results, or this isn't the final renders, but it's kind of close to. And, I love how this whole piece has definitely kind of come together, despite being such a tricky thing to shoot. But all the stuff like rained out, I think all the secondary ash blowing in the air and on the ground, that really helped make the shot. Okay, and the last one of all is the breastplate. And this one again was one of those that we ended up building, or Desiree built a completely digital, like 3D model of the breastplate, and we had it matching up pretty damn accurately to the references that we shot on set. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a reference video of Kratos with it on because they didn't want to mess up his makeup. So I'm like, come on, like, I want to be able to actually see how this is going to look on him instead of having to guess. But we did all the transition. There's like the render with it on just as a test, but then transitioning to ash. And it's the same as how we did the wide shots, but I really love how that turned out. The shader, again, Des built, rocked. It looked amazing. And the whole effect was all Krakatoa, TP, and it came together very quickly. So that is it for the God of War section. Hope you enjoyed it. And lastly, if you need to contact me, here are my details. Add me to Facebook if you like. I'm actually giving away a lot of free stuff these days, a lot of video tutorials. I've got a lot of cool stuff coming out, so feel free to add me to Twitter or Facebook or whatever you want. More the merrier. And again, thank you everyone for listening. It's been really great being a part of this, and talk to you soon. All right, thank you.
That's it for now. Leave a comment below, and also just let me know what you think of this format, if it's something that you'd like to see more of these, because I definitely would love to see what it is that you're interested in, as I want to put out more of this sort of content.